Hi, I'm Ash, but you can call me Icon for short. I used to be a huge fan of House. House MD, for those unaware, is a medical drama starring Hugh Laurie as the titular Dr. Gregory House. He's a diagnostician, a fake kind of doctor, who works to diagnose patients with unusual symptoms that other doctors can't seem to figure out. He and his team work on unusual cases where diagnosis is difficult, making the often life-threatening diseases their patients come in with difficult to treat. Anyway, I used to be a huge fan of House, and in a lot of ways I wanted to be like House. He was successful, didn't have to take shit from anyone, and had a wit and intellect that outmatched his peers. People didn't always like him, but he was always right, and he always did what he thought was best for people, no matter the consequences. He had a lot of lines I enjoyed quoting. He was written as the kind of person who seemingly always had the perfect comeback locked and loaded, just waiting for the right situation to use it. Plenty of the show's fanbase had this idea too. There's lots of compilations of his best lines on YouTube, people quote him a lot, and I've seen a lot of people refer to him as an inspiration to them in many ways. He doesn't put up with bullshit and takes everyone to task. A very common line in the show is that House is an ass, but he's always right. You might not like him, but you had to respect him. I recently revisited the show after seeing a video essay about it pop up in my recommendations on YouTube. I never watched the video, but it reminded me that I hadn't seen the show in a while, and I wanted to go back to that irritating, irrepressible intellectual I remembered. After watching through the first season, I was very confused. The show was mostly how I remembered it, except the tone was very different. I remembered House as a triumphant and stoic figure who was occasionally plagued by personal issues, but ultimately stood on top. This wasn't at all how the show actually portrayed him. He is, in fact, a deeply miserable and pessimistic nihilist, addicted to painkillers and intensely unreceptive to any and all criticism, and takes pleasure in tormenting his staff, superiors, patients, and even complete strangers. I was a bit perplexed as to how I could have misremembered him to such an extent. It's not like his addiction to painkillers was an irrelevant detail. It's the basis for several episodes and a couple of the show's seasons. His antics make up a large portion of most episodes, and the pleasure he derives from them is obvious.
Oops.
Everything about him that wasn't admirable was front and center, and I couldn't figure out why I hadn't remembered the show in that way. I originally understood this as an issue simply of the show's basic structure, that House needed to continue to exist, and so the show conformed to him, despite how contradictory that may end up seeming. I was convinced of this for a time, but I spoke about the show with a friend, and it became clear what the actual issue was. House is an embodiment of toxic masculinity, and the show is promoting his toxicity. This probably isn't a shock to most people, but I think it's worth examining the details of this portrayal of toxic masculinity, and why it seems to have resonated with people. The first season of the show is mostly trying to find its footing, but once we get a few episodes in, the first arc of the show starts, as we're introduced to Vogler. Vogler is a successful and wealthy businessman who makes a substantial donation to Princeton Plainsboro Teaching Hospital, the hospital House works in. He recounts a story of his father doubting his ambitions and being unsupportive, and the two becoming estranged. After he began to make some headway in his career and become successful, he came back to gloat to his father. He found out that his father had Alzheimer's disease, and this is the reason he gives for donating so much to the hospital. He wants to help find a cure for such diseases, and what he asks in return is that he be made part of the hospital's board, to ensure that his money is well spent. Vogler's conditions are met by the hospital's administration, and rules begin to be enforced a bit more strictly than usual. House, of course, doesn't like this. The first season focuses on House's battle with Vogler for control of the hospital, as Vogler attempts to undermine House and get him to submit to his authority. House rebels every time, and every consequence he faces only serves to prevent his patients from receiving vital care or to torment his staff. The first time the two conflict, House refuses to wear a white coat, like all other doctors in the hospital, a simple and relatively innocent request that he sees as a threat to his position.
I need you to wear your lab coat.
I need 2 days of outrageous sex with someone obscenely younger than you, like half your age.
Wear the coat.
Man, oh man, someone got spanked real good this morning.
Guy gives $100 million to cure cancer. Pretty small concession to wear a lab coat.
The hospital administrator and dean of medicine, Lisa Cuddy, attempts to form compromises that House continually rejects. Later in the season, Vogler coerces House into promoting a drug his company is producing, and House refuses to play along, storming out in the middle of his prepared speech. On paper, this might read like the selfish temper tantrums of a childish narcissist, but the show portrays House as a noble underdog, fighting to ensure Vogler doesn't gain a sinister foothold within the hospital. Here, we gain our crucial insight into toxic masculinity through House, one that will be important to keep in mind. Toxic masculinity is obsessed with power. House challenges Vogler initially not because he demonstrates any sinister intent, but because Vogler tries to assert power over him. House continually displays his dominance by refusing to submit, even if it makes everyone around him miserable, including himself. The point isn't to win. The point isn't even to defend any sort of principles. House fights because the one thing he wants is complete power over everyone in his life. We can see the ramifications of this in many respects. House, throughout the entirety of the show, endangers his friendship with James Wilson, the head of oncology at the hospital, by playing cruel jokes and pranks on him, many of which violate basic respect for personal boundaries and consent. That's not even the worst of it, though. He steals his best friend's prescription pad to forge prescriptions for his pain medication. He doesn't do this because he doesn't value Wilson's friendship. Quite the opposite. He does it because the relationship is beneficial to him, but he can't stand the idea of Wilson having any sort of power over him. He isn't honest with Wilson because that would give him an advantage in their relationship. He can't be emotionally open with him because that would give Wilson power over him. He's closed off and does everything he can to constantly signal that he is in control. This need for control extends to his romantic and sexual life as well. The show makes significant efforts to point out how House is only ever really involved with sex workers, who he has complete power over. He has no interest in romantic relationships, for the most part, because romance implies that he has to share something of himself with someone else, which would give them power over him. He can't open up to anyone, because opening up would mean losing his control over his relationships. If he can't manipulate the people around him whenever he wants, then what's the point of the relationship? His need for control is most obvious in his workplace. He routinely violates legal and ethical guidelines, experiments on patients, defies his superiors, walks all over other staff, and torments his own subordinates. He doesn't do this out of cruelty, necessarily, but to demonstrate that he is in control in every situation. He regularly clashes with authority figures of all kinds, judges, police officers, lawyers, and patients whose consent he requires for treatment. He attempts to demonstrate that their authority is meaningless to him. He gets in trouble for this at times, but the show mostly vindicates him as a martyr of sorts, always the underdog fighting the big bad system for the good of his patients. Power is House's primary concern at all times in all circumstances. His posturing to authority and cruelty toward others serve only to ensure that he is always the alpha, in control of all situations. He never submits and he never loses. As the show always says, House is always right. So far, I think I've made a decent case that House's toxic masculinity is concerned with power, but how does the show frame this? I mentioned earlier, House has serious addiction to his pain medication. He regularly gets in trouble, and he has no fulfilling relationships. This would certainly seem more like a warning against this behavior than an endorsement, right? Well, it's not quite that simple. The show makes a concerted effort to depict the incentives in place that reward House for his antisocial behavior. Firstly, there is a great emphasis on respect. House is actively abusive at worst, and manipulative and self-interested at best, and this doesn't exactly benefit his relationships. Everyone hates him or avoids him, and not a single person he meets even likes him. His best friend, Wilson, is only his friend because Wilson worries about what might happen to him if he had no support network at all. House doesn't care about being liked, but he does care about respect. House is always portrayed as highly competent, a genius doctor who does what other doctors can't, and this gains him a reputation for being good at his job. His reputation is what matters most to him. Later in the show, he recounts a story of a doctor he met when he was a kid. Nobody liked him, but being smart meant he didn't need to be liked. Everyone relied on him too much in a crisis to let their personal feelings toward him get in the way. What House learned from this is that being unpleasant, rude, and even abusive will be tolerated so long as he's good at what he does, so he makes sure to be very good at what he does. His job is his life because he has nothing else that he can use to get people to respect him. People might actively hate him, but making himself indispensable means that they have to at least tolerate him while he's useful. The first season even ends with Vogler's contributions to the hospital being refunded because House is too valuable to lose, and Vogler won't stop until House is fired. House's addiction is seen through this lens not only by the character, but the show itself. House's addiction is an often discussed subject in the show, but the only times he's encouraged to address the issue with any urgency are when it threatens his job. He begins hallucinating at one point, but his hallucination is useful to him in performing his job, so he doesn't even mention it to anyone for fear they'll intervene. Only when he realizes he can't do his job does he ever act. You may have noticed I haven't said that he struggles with addiction at any point, because he actively embraces his addiction and explicitly says that he doesn't view it as a problem. The only problem is it interfering with his ability to do his job. He's under no illusions that he isn't really addicted, he knows he is, but as long as his addiction doesn't impede his daily functioning at work, he sees no reason to address it, and the show completely agrees.
You learned anything?
Yeah. I'm an addict.
There are programs. You could get on a different pain management
I
regimen.
don't need to stop.
You just said...
I said I was an addict. I didn't say I had a problem.
He admitted he's addicted to the narcotics.
Well, admitting you have a problem is
And
the
he
first...
says it's not a problem. Maybe it's not.
House is chided for his addiction on occasion, but he ultimately gets the job done. He's always right, so his addiction itself is rarely treated as an issue. His addiction isn't a struggle or a battle, it's how he manages to function on a day-to-day basis. There's even an episode about how losing his pain and addiction cause him to run an unnecessary test to satisfy a patient's parents, which spirals out of control until the patient nearly dies. The show indicates that House's addiction is, at worst, a necessary evil for him to be competent in his position as a doctor. The second primary incentive for his toxic behavior is its effect on women. House is a cishet white man, and his need to be in control and his refusal to bow to authority is implied to be attractive to the women around him. His superior, Dr. Cuddy, seems to be completely enraptured by him, risking lawsuits, HR complaints, and even giving up millions of dollars just to keep House around. House's subordinate, Dr. Cameron, in one episode says she will only return to work with him if they go on a proper date. There's an episode where House is stalked by a 17-year-old girl who really wants to, get with him.
Oops.
House's behavior is seemingly rewarded with a sort of sexual irresistibility, where he can have almost any woman he wants because they are enthralled by his masculine charm. House's ex-wife is a good example of this. House's charms spark their relationship again, and he slowly manipulates her into falling in love with him again. She's already remarried, but House is sure to sow discontent and conflict in their relationship to make her available. He is actively rewarded for this, and his ex-wife seems unfazed by his behavior.
I'm going to talk to Mark tonight, and I'm going to stay here with you.
His desire for control and power seems to only strengthen her attraction to him, and even when she finds out he was manipulating her, she still wants to be with him. As you can imagine, the show's worldview, and House's as well, are deeply disgusting. He has an attitude towards humans governed by ideas of evolutionary psychology, where humans are all essentially like he is, power-hungry, manipulative, and self-righteous. Everyone is looking to gain power in his mind. The only difference is that he's honest about it. This gives him the appearance of cutting through the bullshit, of taking people to task. He analyzes everything through the lens of conflict and domination, and forms a perverse nihilism as a result. His worldview is endorsed by the show, as religion, love, and principle are all dismantled and revealed as mere pretenses for a search for control. Religious people only care about controlling their destiny and justifying or absolving their mistakes. Families are built on foundations of guilt and lies, and principles are thin veils for self-righteous attention-seeking. People, like the diseases House attempts to diagnose and treat, are just puzzles to be solved. Understand their internal mechanics, and you can find the solution you need. Interpersonal relationships aren't a product of understanding, trust, and mutual respect, but simply a series of games and puzzles, and if you can crack the code, you can get people to do whatever you want. The show's endorsement of these views is far from passive or unwitting. Season 6 sees House enter rehab and shows us his journey to get better and be better. He initially fights the staff at the rehab center, but after his reckless overconfidence injures another patient, he begins to work on improving himself. He fights his addiction, attends therapy, and tries to mend his personal relationships while moving on from the environment that facilitated his behavior in the past. He manages to connect with other people and learns alternative coping strategies to simply swallowing painkillers. And it makes him miserable. Everything he does to improve makes him utterly miserable. His pain doesn't go away, his relationships don't stabilize, and he can't bring himself to leave his past behind him. The show sends a pretty clear message. Being better doesn't work.
I followed your advice. And instead, I'm just miserable. How is this working for me?
It takes time.
For a year, I've done everything you've asked, and everybody else is happy. I run my treadmill. You just sit there and watch. You're a faith healer.
He loses the control that his painkillers, his position, and his behavior gave him, and losing that is too much for him to bear. Rather than this being unintentional, the show seems to actively embrace the toxic masculinity that House exemplifies by showing that alternatives simply don't work. All relationships in the show are unhealthy and imbalanced. Everyone who tries to be good is punished for it, and everyone who believes in anything is miserable. Same as House. The difference is, House has control. He's looked behind the curtain and is intent on showing everyone else that the wizard is nothing but a man. He isn't manipulative, rude, and abusive for lack of care. On the contrary, the fact that he's willing to disrespect people's boundaries and beliefs demonstrates that he does care and wants them to be like him. He may not be happy, but he's in control, and people need him too much to get rid of him. If everyone's miserable, he may as well be in control. This worldview, that of toxic masculinity, has a core assumption that I see as the reason I embraced it when I first saw the show, but was baffled upon revisiting it. I first saw the show in high school, a time where I was depressed, nearly failed multiple classes, and had very few friends, but upon revisiting it, I was in a much better place with my mental health and my academics. It made so little sense to me to think of House as a role model when I came back to the show, because the toxic masculinity assumes something I couldn't conceive of thinking now, that everyone is always miserable. With this assumption in mind, this worldview begins to gain some coherence. The main thing that confused me about the show was how front and center House's flaws are and how miserable he is, and how that kind of character could possibly be idolized. But if we assume that everyone is as miserable as he is, as I was, then what House offers us is power and control in a world full of lies and manipulation. In that light, its proposal is significantly more appealing. Toxic masculinity might not make you happy, but its sales pitch is considerably more attractive if being happy is unattainable anyway. Why bother lying to yourself with religion, philosophy, relationships, or principles? The only thing that ultimately matters is power, and that's something you can take whether anybody likes you or not. I thought to examine this in a bit more detail because I think people can sometimes portray toxic masculinity as a bit of an enigma, as though it's difficult to understand and sort of a mystery why people might subscribe to it. I don't think portraying it in that way is particularly helpful to anyone, because understanding what it is and how it works is vital to effectively countering it. It works by promising men that their misery is unavoidable, and the best they can hope for is power over others, gained through the methods toxic masculinity prescribes. It's essentially a multi-level marketing scheme, promising that if you'll only follow their simple program, you'll end up on the top of the pyramid in no time. The problem is that the system is designed for that to be impossible. Pyramids only have the one point on top, and the program requires at least some people to be subordinate for the business model to function. My question after returning to the show was how I ever bought what it was selling. I think the answer is that it's the only sales pitch that felt like it was directed at me, that understood what I knew as a sophomore in high school, that I'm always miserable and happiness is impossible. It's a predatory system of thinking that preys on the vulnerable and miserable and reassures them not that everything will be okay, but that they're right to be hopeless. I think the best way to counter that is to challenge that assumption and provide what toxic masculinity never can: hope. Not just hope for the future, but hope in the future and faith in humanity. That's all I've got to say this time around. Thanks for watching. I have some links down below, including my Twitter, Twitch, and my Patreon page, where you can help support the work I'm trying to put out. Thank you for your time, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.